Whisper of the Heart is a 1995 Japanese coming-of-age romance film, and it has to be one of the best coming-of-age films that you have never heard of. Made by Studio Ghibli, which is an animation studio that is most famous for the films by Hayao Miyazaki, which feature fantastical adventures in magical far-off places, the film is very grounded and is in fact one of the few in their lineup which doesn't feature any true fantasy, aside from a few certain imagined sequences. And while it doesn't feature explicit magic or in fact takes the magical route the way that other Studio Ghibli films have, it continues the legacy of exploring childhood nostalgia and childhood imagination the way that the studio has perfectly curated and creates in the way that no other animation studio has really been able to replicate. And while some of Miyazaki's films also feature coming-of-age stories like Spirited Away or My Neighbor Totoro, it is one of the few films in the studio's lineup that is actually slice of life. Not only that, but the film is also extremely important for the fact that it was the only one to be directed by Yoshifumi Kondo, who, if you didn't know, was an animation director with the studio for years and who was set up to actually be Miyazaki's successor before he died in 1998. Let me give you a bit of a summary, though I will warn you, watching the film will forever be better than hearing about it from me. So the film follows 14-year-old Tsukishima Shizuku during her final year of middle school, and one of the first things we learn about her is that she loves to read. So much so that along with writing lyrics for her friend Yuko Harada, all she seems to be doing is reading, which is especially troublesome when everyone around her is telling her she should be studying for her high school entrance exams. So as any good bookworm does, she tends to borrow a lot of books from different places, including the library her father works at, the library at her school, and the one thing she notices about all these books is they seem to have something to do with someone called Seiji Amasawa, whether that be his family donated the books or he checked it out before her. So after meeting up with her friend Yuko to go over some of the song lyrics she's written and borrow a book from the school's library, which also coincidentally has the Amasawa name attached to it, Shizuku runs into a boy she immediately dislikes because he reads and makes fun of her song lyrics.
Hi, editing Cece here. So, I got a bit too excited about this film and I kind of ended up spoiling the whole thing because I went too much into a summary. So basically all you need to know is that after this interaction, Shizuku finds her way to this very cool, very kind of magical antique shop, and she kind of becomes friends with the old man who runs it, who is also called Nishi, and she continues to run into this boy, but they still have like teasing interactions. But then basically what happens is her and this boy, as they see each other more often, they become closer, and she finds out eventually that he is the boy who has been checking out all the books before her. And with that, they kind of grow together and decide to pursue both their passions together because they're both very creative people. Okay, hope that clears it up.
There are multiple things I admire about this movie. As you can probably tell by my smiling, the trope of the romance is so sweet, but the film is well animated and directed, the visuals for even something as mundane as an antique shop are beautiful. But one thing that really stands out about the film is that despite these sweeping, beautiful sequences of Shizuku recounting what's happening in her book, the film is extremely grounded and takes its slice of life categorization very seriously. While Shizuku is the main character, everyone seems to have things going on around her. There's this one line, and it's a complete throwaway line, but I absolutely adore it. Shizuku goes to her friend Yuko's to talk about this whole Seiji situation, and while Shizuku is saying hi to her parents, Yuko just says, "I'm not speaking to my father at the moment, we're having a fight." Nothing before this has been mentioned about this fight, nothing after is mentioned about this fight. It's just so grounded in the fact that this is a real world and people have things going on beyond Shizuku. It just feels very much like you are in a real world and that you can believe everything that's happening. In fact, small moments like this are created for every character. Shizuku's sister is hoping for a chance of independence, Nishi has this tragic love story, and I could go on and on. And in some films this could really drag or bog it down. Some shots in this film probably do linger a bit too long, and become this sort of extreme form of naturalism, but I can't help but be endeared by the fact that you're really immersed in this world, and it really is a world because there's so much going on beyond the main character. However, this world also really makes the characters feel real. You understand Shizuku and her motivations, you understand her parents' anxieties, you understand everyone's interests, their emotions, and they're all rational and realistic, which for me I find is important in a slice of life coming of age story like this. It makes the story more emotionally relatable and immersive if the world and the characters feel real. Speaking of realistic, the film is also very good at crafting this beautifully realistic love story. And yes, it is slightly tropey, which potentially could drag away from the realism of it all, but I think it also makes sense that this boy who has no idea how to communicate his feelings has been trying to get her attention this whole time. In fact, I think it's one of the few films that actually correctly makes a sort of Pride and Prejudice-esque dynamic. There's something to be said about how well it captures Darcy and Elizabeth. And don't worry, I won't go too far on this tangent, but one of the biggest things that I will say about fiction and fictional romance is that Mr. Darcy is the biggest socially awkward dork out there. He isn't good around people, and that's sort of what makes him standoffish and rude. So is it safe to say that him and Seiji are the same? Well, as much as they can be if Mr. Darcy is a teenage boy in 1990s Tokyo. Of course, he doesn't really need to have the same realization and self-improvement arc that Darcy has, but you can really see that socially awkward and sort of standoffish side to him. He teases Shizuku the first few interactions he has with her because he doesn't know how to communicate with her. It's once they begin to talk more often, having bonded over their passions, that their romance is truly one of the sweetest in the film and in Studio Ghibli's lineup. Not to mention they have all these beautifully emotional scenes where they just gush about how much they like each other. The whole film really takes care to tell you that these two people really love and care about each other and support each other. And they have this really meaningful and beautiful connection, which is so wholesome and heartwarming. But this all comes together to create a film that is a celebration of the wonders of life. As I mentioned earlier, Ghibli is a studio that is masterful at representing childhood nostalgia and imagination. This, among other things, such as the strong female protagonist and the maturity with which they treat a coming-of-age story, is emblematic of the studio and noticeably present in this film. And though this film can feel detached from the rest of the lineup, even though it has a sequel that was also made by the studio, magic is still present and seeps into every frame of the film. And not only in the scenes portraying Shizuku's fantasy book, but it then creates this expression of the joys and adventures in regular life, which, from the context of a studio famous for its fantasy films and beyond, you can't help but feel enchanted and inspired by. Now, I first watched this film when I was 14, and I have loved it ever since. But then I watched it again this year, and it hit different. To get a bit personal, this past year has been difficult, which I know it has been for everyone. It's been difficult to try regain passion and motivation to be creative and to be excited about future projects. So with that, there was something so inspiring and precious about Seiji and Shizuku's passion that it not only inspired me to, well, make this video, but also to return to things that I'd abandoned. And I think there's something so special about the way that fiction can move us in ways that this film has affected me. But I also think that's what the film tries to communicate, that we should find things in life that drive our passions and our creativity, that we should find the magic and adventure within our own lives. So while it may not be the most fast-paced film or the most thrilling and exciting film, there's something about this film that I keep coming back to and finding new meaning in. It's sweet and inspiring and wholesome in the best ways, and I find it criminally underrated. So, with that being said, check out Whisper of the Heart. It's the best coming-of-age film you've never seen. Also, I don't know if you can tell, but I really tried to look like Seiji. Like, this is my best outfit attempt to look like Seiji. How did I do? Did I do well?